Hello, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet corner of the cosmos where your thoughts can breathe freely and knowledge drifts gently like a lullaby for the night. Tonight, we're setting out on one of the most mysterious and personal journeys of all, an exploration into the nature of consciousness itself, what it is, where it begins, and how something so familiar can still feel so impossible to explain. Before we begin, if these calm explorations bring you a sense of peace or curiosity, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if it truly feels right to you. And when you're ready, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always a quiet wonder to see how far our little constellation of listeners stretches, each of us drifting together, yet each in our own small moment in time. Now go ahead and dim the lights. Let the hum of the night surround you, soft and steady. And together, let's begin our gentle descent into the mystery of consciousness, the world within you that's been quietly watching all along. And if your thoughts begin to wander, that's perfectly all right. Let them drift. We'll still be here, slowly unfolding the story. Consciousness. It's a word that feels both too big and too close at the same time. You don't have to search for it, because it's what you are already using to search. You don't have to look at it, because it is the act of looking itself. If I ask you to think of the taste of morning coffee, the warmth of the cup between your palms, the tiny curls of steam rising into the chill of the air, and then that first sip, which is somehow both bitter and comforting, you don't just remember the coffee, you remember the feeling. That gentle flood of awareness is consciousness. It's there when you stub your toe and feel that sharp jolt of pain. It's there when someone you love squeezes your hand and you feel both the touch and the comfort behind it. It's there in the laughter that surprises you and the quiet sorrow that lingers after someone has gone. But what is it really? Is it a physical process like the clicking of keys in a typewriter? Or is it something deeper, like the invisible story that words make once the ink is dry? You can measure brain activity with electrodes and watch as neurons fire like tiny electrical storms in the night, but no machine has ever recorded what it feels like to be you. That is the mystery, the strange gap between the mechanics of matter and the warmth of experience. Think of the difference between a photograph of a sunset and the actual act of standing under a painted sky. The photograph is clear, measurable, pixels and shades and data. But the real sunset, with its slow bleed of gold into crimson, its hush over the horizon, the way it makes you sigh without knowing why, that is an experience. Consciousness is the difference between the picture and the presence, between description and being. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Descartes, sitting in his study, tried to doubt everything. The world, the senses, even his own body. And yet he realized there was one thing he could not doubt, that he was doubting. The act of thinking itself proved that there was a thinker. I think, therefore I am. A short phrase, but really it means, I am conscious, therefore I know that anything exists at all. And yet, even though we live inside it every moment of our lives, consciousness refuses to be neatly boxed or explained away. You might think of it like the glasses you wear all day long. They're so close to your eyes you forget they're there, and yet without them the world is blurred. Consciousness is the unseen lens that makes the world visible. Without it, nothing else could be known. This is why some people call it the light of lights. You can shine a flashlight onto a wall and see what is there. You can shine it onto your own hand and notice every wrinkle and line. But you can never shine a light onto the beam itself, not directly. Consciousness is like that. It illuminates everything, but it cannot be turned back on itself so easily. And tonight, together, we'll wander through the landscapes of science, philosophy, and even a little poetry to see what has been said about this quiet light that never goes out. Neuroscientists will show us maps of the brain, with sparks and circuits and fields of activity. Philosophers will invite us into rooms of paradox and careful arguments, asking us whether the mind is matter or whether matter is only mind. Spiritual traditions like Vedānta will remind us that consciousness might be the backdrop of reality itself, the screen on which the play of life appears, and modern artificial intelligence will tempt us with another question. Could a machine, someday, feel as you feel? But we will not rush. We'll move slowly, like a walk by the river at twilight, pausing to look at ripples in the water or the way the air changes as the sun sinks lower. Each theory we encounter will be softened into stories and metaphors so that you never feel the weight of jargon, but only the gentle pull of curiosity. Consciousness, after all, is not just a subject for scientists in white coats or monks in deep meditation. It is the one thing you carry everywhere, the one companion you cannot lose, the one mystery that refuses to leave you alone. And perhaps that is what makes it so comforting to talk about as you drift towards sleep. You are, in this moment, aware of these words, aware of your breath, aware of the softness of the pillow under your head. That is consciousness, quietly shining, with no effort at all. So tonight, as we begin, I invite you to rest in that awareness, to notice how simple and profound it is just to be. And as we continue, we will follow this mystery deeper into the brain's chambers, into the paradoxes of philosophy, into the whispers of ancient wisdom and the questions of tomorrow's machines. But for now, just notice you are here and you are conscious, and that is already the greatest wonder of all. If you close your eyes for a moment, you may notice that the world does not disappear. You still know that you are here. You may hear the hum of the room, or the faint movement of your own breath, or even the quiet rhythm of your heart if you listen closely. And underneath all of these shifting sounds and sensations, there is something steady, the simple fact of being aware. Consciousness does not need a view, or a voice, or even a thought in order to exist. It is the quiet stage on which those things arrive and depart. This recognition has been with us for centuries. René Descartes, sitting alone in 17th century France, tried to doubt everything he could. He imagined that perhaps his senses were deceiving him, that maybe the world was a dream, that even the ground under his feet could be a trick played by some mischievous spirit. But when he came to the act of doubting itself, he found something he could not escape. Even if everything else was uncertain, the very fact that he was doubting proved that there was a doubter. I think, therefore I am. It was not a proud declaration, but a soft admission that awareness is the one foundation that survives even the deepest doubt. And yet, the cogito, I think I am, can be softened even further. It is not really the thinking that proves existence, it is the knowing of the thinking. You're not simply a bundle of thoughts. You're the one who experiences them. Imagine sitting at a cafe watching people pass. Some conversations float toward you, a laugh from one table, the clink of cutlery from another, a sudden burst of a song from someone's phone. All of it swirls around you, but what makes it real is not the noise itself, it is your awareness of it. Consciousness is the listener that holds all the sounds. Without it, even the most detailed information would mean nothing. A book can hold thousands of words, but if no one reads it, those words are silent marks. A computer can process endless streams of numbers, but without awareness, there is no one to feel the meaning of those numbers. Consciousness is what turns information into experience. It is the difference between hearing a description of bread and tasting bread on your tongue, between a diagram of a melody and the shiver that runs through you when you actually hear the violin swell. This is why some traditions call it the ground of knowing. It is the soil from which every thought, memory, and sensation grows. You might picture it like a canvas. The colours painted upon it are always changing. Bright blues, soft greys, a streak of gold. But the canvas itself remains. Or you might think of the sky. Clouds pass, storms come and go, but the sky remains the open space in which all weather appears. Consciousness is that sky. Thoughts are the clouds. Emotions are the rain. Perceptions are the winds. But the sky itself, empty, open and steady, remains untouched. This idea is so natural that it is easy to miss. Each day, you wake up and without thinking you find yourself already aware of the light creeping through the curtains, of the sheets against your skin, of the stretch in your arms. It seems ordinary, but it is not ordinary at all. It is extraordinary that there is something it is like to be you in this very moment. The philosopher Thomas Nagel once wrote about this, asking the famous question, what is it like to be a bat? A bat has wings, sonar, and a way of living so alien to us that we can never quite imagine it. And yet we can be sure of one thing. There is something it is like to be a bat. There is a bat experience. Just as there is a you experience, consciousness is the what it is like that makes life personal. And so, when scientists today look into the brain with their intricate machines, what they are really trying to do is find the patterns that stand beside this invisible knowing. They see neurons fire, they track rhythms of electrical waves, they map regions that glow with activity. But what they want is not the sparks themselves. They want the bridge between sparks and experience. They want to understand how the roar of brain activity becomes the softness of a remembered lullaby, or the sharp edge of embarrassment, or the sudden thrill of recognition. It is a gap we cannot cross easily. Matter seems mute, yet here it sings. Circuits seem blind, yet here they see. And this gap is what has come to be called the hard problem. But before we dive into that challenge, it is important to pause and recognize what is already clear, that consciousness is the condition for anything to be known at all. Without it, there is no hard problem, no science, no philosophy, no story. With it, there is a universe unfolding inside every glance, every heartbeat, every moment of being alive. Think of the flame of a candle. You can measure the temperature of the wax, the chemical reaction of combustion, the flickering of air currents. But the glow of the flame, the warmth that reaches your skin, the way the light dances on the wall, that is how it feels to be near a candle. Consciousness is like that glow. It is not just the mechanism, it is the presence. As you listen tonight, you may notice how awareness itself has a softness. Even if your thoughts wander, the awareness of wandering is still there. Even if your eyes grow heavy, the awareness of sleepiness is still there. It is always present, always the quiet backdrop, always the silent witness. And so we begin here, with Descartes and with our own direct noticing. Awareness is the one thing that cannot be doubted, the one thing that carries everything else. From this ground, we will step forward into the deeper puzzles. How can such a simple, obvious presence feel so impossible to explain? Why do neurons give rise to a world of colour, sound, love and longing? In the next part of our journey, we will walk slowly into this mystery, the explanatory gap, the hard problem, and begin to see why consciousness is not only the ground of knowing, but also the most enduring riddle of the mind. If you sit quietly for a moment and place your hand against the table beside you, you may notice how the surface feels, perhaps smooth, perhaps a little cool, perhaps with tiny imperfections that your fingertips can detect more clearly than your eyes. Now imagine describing that sensation to someone else. You could say the table is made of wood, that its surface has been polished, that the molecules in its structure vibrate at a certain frequency which your skin detects. Science can map the neurons in your hand as they fire, the electrical signals travelling up your arm, into your spinal cord and finally into your brain. But none of these measurements capture what it actually feels like to touch the table. There is a gulf between the firing of neurons and the lived experience of touch. This gulf is what philosophers call the explanatory gap. It is not a small puzzle, but perhaps the deepest mystery in all of science. David Chalmers, a philosopher of mind, gave it a name that has since become famous, the hard problem of consciousness. There are easy problems, of course, though they are not truly easy, only easier in comparison. How does the brain recognize faces? How do we store memories? How do our muscles coordinate to walk across a room? These are questions that neuroscience is gradually answering with experiments, with scans, with careful maps of activity. But the hard problem is different. It asks, why does any of this processing lead to an inner movie at all? Why does matter, when arranged as brains, glow from the inside with awareness? To get a sense of this, consider pain. If you stub your toe on a chair in the dark, there are many things science can tell us. It can trace the rush of ions through nerves, the opening of channels in your cells, the burst of chemical messengers that climb your spinal cord to your brain. It can show you which regions of the brain ignite in response, areas in the somatosensory cortex, the insula, the anterior cingulate. And yet, none of this explains the sheer fact of what it feels like when pain blooms, sharp and undeniable, making you wince. It explains the machinery, but not the experience. This is where the candle metaphor helps. Imagine you measure a candle with all the tools of physics. You can calculate the rate of combustion, the temperature of the wax, the wavelength of the light. You can even predict how quickly the candle will melt into a small pool at its base. But none of this captures the glow, the warmth that reaches your skin, the dance of light that softens the room, the hush that fills the air when a candle burns at night. The flame is more than the chemistry. And in the same way, consciousness feels like more than the circuitry. Some scientists hearing this suggest that maybe we're simply confused, that the feeling is nothing extra, just the brain, representing itself, perhaps so. But the gap remains stubborn, because every explanation in physical terms seems to stop short of the very thing we are most certain of, what it is like to be alive, here and now. Think of the sound of music. A song can be reduced to frequencies, amplitudes, and vibrations of air molecules. A computer can display it as a waveform, a neat curve on a screen. But the goosebumps you feel when the melody swells, the way a lyric can make tears well up, the strange nostalgia that arrives from just a few notes, these are not captured in the curve. The music has an inside, and so do we. That inside is experience. The explanatory gap, then, is like a river that has no bridge. On one bank are the neurons, the ions, the measurements, the physical details. On the other bank is the shimmering world of colour, taste, love, grief, and joy. We stand on the shore watching the other side, and we do not yet know how to cross. Chalmers has put it simply. Explaining behaviour and function is one thing, but explaining why it feels like something to be that system is another. He calls this the hard problem, because no matter how many easy problems we solve, this one remains untouched. We can learn how the brain recognises a face, how it directs attention, how it binds information. But why those processes are accompanied by the glow of subjective life remains unanswered. And perhaps what makes the gap even more haunting is that it is so familiar. You do not need a laboratory to encounter it. Right now, as you hear these words, you're not just receiving information, you're experiencing them. There is a sound, but also the feeling of listening, the mood of the moment, the awareness of yourself in it. You're not a machine humming in the dark. You are a being, alive to yourself, luminous from the inside. That is the undeniable fact the hard problem points toward. Some try to dismiss the puzzle, arguing that once we understand the brain's functions well enough, the mystery will dissolve, just as the mystery of life once did when biology uncovered the workings of cells. But others say that consciousness is different, that even a complete description of function leaves the subjective untouched. It may be, as some thinkers suggest, that we need new concepts altogether, concepts that bridge physics and experience matter and mind. For now, though, we live with the gap, and maybe that is part of the beauty of it. To be conscious is to live inside the question, to wake each morning into a world that is not only there but also felt. You might say that the gap is the place where mystery and wonder leak into science, refusing to be tidied away. And perhaps that is why, even as you drift towards sleep thinking of neurons and philosophers and candles, you may also feel a quiet gratitude that you are here, awake to yourself, bathed in the glow that no measurement can replace. When scientists meet the mystery of consciousness, they do not usually start by trying to solve the whole riddle at once. Instead, they begin by asking a smaller, more practical question. If we cannot yet explain why experience exists, perhaps we can at least find where in the brain it seems to shine the brightest. This line of inquiry has given rise to what are called the neural correlates of consciousness, or NCC. But rather than treating the phrase as heavy jargon, we might imagine it as the brain's echoes that always arrive with awareness. Wherever you find consciousness, you find these patterns. Wherever you find these patterns, you are close to the presence of consciousness. It is a bit like trying to locate the source of music in a theatre. You cannot yet say why the music stirs the soul, but you can trace where the sound is coming from, which instruments contribute to it, and how they blend together. The NCC are those instruments, the brain regions and rhythms that light up when consciousness is present and fall silent when it fades. For many years, scientists believed the frontal lobes, the seat of reasoning, decision-making and speech, would be the obvious place to look. After all, when you think of human awareness, you might picture a kind of inner narrator speaking in words, planning, judging, naming. But experiments have surprised us. The more closely researchers examine the brain, the more they find that consciousness seems less like a spotlight in the front row, and more like a set of stage lights glowing quietly at the back. This has led to the idea of the posterior hot zone. Located toward the rear of the brain, this region integrates vision, touch, and the basic layout of space around us. It is the canvas upon which the sensory world is painted. When this area is active, vivid experiences are reported. The colours of a dream, the shape of a remembered room, the sound of a voice in imagination. When this area is quieted, whether by injury, anesthesia, or deep sleep, experience tends to fade. The metaphor of a stage can help. Imagine the mind as a vast theatre. The front of the stage, with its actors and dialogue, is like the frontal lobes, full of movement, language, plans. But behind them, unseen, are the stage lights, the set, the backdrop. These are prepared by the posterior regions. They do not speak, but without them, the play would be in darkness. Consciousness, it seems, requires that the lights are switched on, even if the actors at the front believe they are the stars of the show. This is not to say the story is simple. There are debates about which areas are truly essential. Some argue that frontal regions do play a role, especially in self-reflection, in focusing attention, in reporting what one experiences. Others believe the back is where the raw feel of experience is born, and the front only organises and communicates it. The truth may be that both matter, but in different ways, one as the fabric of awareness, the other as the stage, manager who describes it. What matters for us, as quiet wanderers in this field, is not to memorise the geography of brain anatomy, but to feel the image it suggests. Awareness is not a single switch to be flipped. It is a network, a chorus, a dance of activity spread across regions that harmonise. And in that harmony, something more than mechanics seems to arise, the glow of subjectivity, the very thing we live inside. Consider the simple act of seeing a red apple. Light enters your eyes, strikes the retina, triggers a cascade of signals that race through the optic nerve into the brain. Along the way, shapes are outlined, colours sorted, edges sharpened. Eventually the posterior regions weave it together into a whole image. An apple, red, round, resting on the table. But what transforms this into the experience of redness? What makes it more than processing, more than data? This is the question that hovers over every discussion of the NCC. The correlations are there, the echoes are clear, but the bridge between echo and experience remains mysterious. Experiments show us how fragile this correlation can be. A small change in brain state can alter the tapestry of awareness dramatically. A blow to the back of the head can plunge vision into darkness. A seizure can flood awareness with strange colours and sensations. A sudden silence in the posterior hot zone can erase dreams altogether. These are reminders that consciousness, though mysterious, is also physical, embodied, vulnerable. It is not floating apart from the body, but tied delicately to the patterns of flesh and blood. And yet, even as we speak of correlates, we must remember, a map is not the territory. Just because two things occur together does not mean one explains the other fully. The NCC tell us where to look, not why the light of consciousness shines. They give us sketches, not answers. Like explorers charting coastlines without yet knowing the continent within, scientists trace these echoes, hoping someday they may reveal more than patterns. For the listener tonight, the beauty is that this mystery is not distant. It is alive in your own awareness right now. The very brain that houses your experience is quietly generating the patterns we call NCC. As you hear these words, as you notice the flow of thoughts and images, the stage lights in your own posterior regions are glowing. Without them, the theatre would fall into silence. With them, your world is lit. So we pause here, at the edge of maps, holding both clarity and mystery together. The search for neural correlates has given us glimpses, clues, and stage lights, but the music of experience still escapes capture. In the next step of our journey, we'll see how experiments with dreaming, anesthesia, and altered states of mind nudge the veil, showing us just how malleable this fragile thing called awareness can be. If the search for neural correlates gives us a map of where consciousness might flicker in the brain, then the next natural step is to test how that flicker changes when we adjust the conditions. It is a little like dimming and brightening the lights in a room to see which bulbs are essential, which can be turned off, and how the atmosphere shifts. Across the last century, scientists have stumbled upon states where consciousness bends, weakens, disappears, or blossoms in unexpected ways. These states, anesthesia, dreaming, and psychedelic experiences, have become windows into the mystery, not solving it, but nudging it from different sides, showing us how delicate and malleable awareness can be. Let us begin with anesthesia, a phenomenon so ordinary in hospitals today that we forget how astonishing it truly is. Imagine being wheeled into a surgical room. The lights are bright, the instruments gleam, and you are filled with a sense of nervous anticipation. A small mask lowers over your face, or perhaps a needle sends a quiet chill through your arm. Within minutes, the world is gone. Not darkness, not sleep, not even the drifting storylines of a dream, just absence. And yet, your body remains alive. The heart keeps beating, the lungs keep drawing air, the blood keeps moving, but the inner glow is extinguished. Hours may pass, scalpels may move, stitches may close, and when you finally wake, it feels as though no time has moved at all. Anesthesia is one of science's most elegant reminders that consciousness is not continuous by necessity. It can be switched off, not in pieces, but entirely, like blowing out a candle and leaving only smoke. What fascinates neuroscientists is that anesthesia does not simply silence the brain. Many parts of the brain remain active, but it scrambles the ability for these parts to speak to one another in a coherent way. The echoes of consciousness no longer align, the chorus falls into noise. It is as if the orchestra still holds its instruments, but the conductor has left the stage, and what was once music is now scattered sound. From this sudden silence, we can move to another altered state, one that feels almost the opposite, dreaming. Whereas anesthesia erases the inner movie, dreaming intensifies it. In sleep, When the body lies still and the outer world is dimmed, the brain creates entire landscapes from within. You may find yourself walking down a street that does not exist, speaking to people who are long gone, flying across skies you have never seen. The vividness can rival waking life, and yet it is conjured entirely from within the skull. Dreams show us that consciousness does not require the outside world to feed it. Given a spark, the brain generates its own stage, its own actors, its own play. Scientists studying dreams have discovered that during rapid eye movement, REM sleep, the stage when most dreaming occurs, the brain is surprisingly active. The posterior hot zone, that region we spoke of earlier, glows with activity, weaving sights and sounds into immersive worlds. At the same time, frontal regions that handle logic and reflection grow quieter, which may explain why dream stories often drift into absurdity without our questioning them. We accept the impossible, a flying house, a conversation with a childhood pet, because the skeptical narrator has dozed off while the imagination roams free. Dreams, then, are a living demonstration that consciousness is not tied to strict logic, or even to reality itself. It can stretch and bend, building worlds from almost nothing. And then there are psychedelic states, perhaps the most radical of the trio. Substances like psilocybin, LSD, or DMT do not silence consciousness or replace it with sleep, but instead dissolve its ordinary boundaries. People who experience these altered states often describe a sense of unity, of time slowing or disappearing, of colours intensifying, of the self itself becoming fluid. The rigid grip of everyday patterns loosens and new connections surge. Brain scans reveal that these substances reduce activity in tightly controlled networks, especially the default mode network, which is thought to help maintain our sense of self. With its grip softened, regions of the brain that rarely communicate begin to exchange signals freely, producing the kaleidoscopic flood of new associations and perceptions. The experience can be blissful or terrifying, profound or disorienting, but what it always reveals is the fragility of the boundaries we take for granted. The sense of I that feels so solid during the day can dissolve into something larger, or fragment into something unrecognizable. Consciousness here appears not as a fixed point, but as a spectrum, a field that can expand or contract depending on the patterns of the brain. Taken together, anesthesia, dreaming, and psychedelics are like three experiments in the theatre of the mind. Anesthesia lowers the curtain completely, leaving only darkness. Dreaming lifts the curtain on an inner play, scripted and performed by the brain itself. Psychedelics tear open the curtain, flooding the stage with light from directions we did not expect. Each one nudges the mystery of consciousness, showing us that it is not a single unchanging thing, but a delicate balance, a fragile glow that can be tuned in countless ways. For the philosopher, these experiments pose deep questions. If consciousness can vanish under anesthesia, what does that say about its dependence on communication between brain regions? If dreams can create entire worlds without input, does this mean the brain itself is a kind of world maker, a universe generator? If psychedelics can dissolve the sense of self, does this suggest that selfhood is not the core of awareness, but only one pattern it can take? For the rest of us, they invite quieter reflections. Perhaps you remember a surgery, waking with the sense that time itself had been stolen away. Perhaps you remember a dream so vivid it haunted you for days, making you question which world was more real. Perhaps you've known moments, whether through meditation, music, or even substances, that blurred the line between yourself and the larger world. These are not distant laboratory findings. They are human experiences, reminders that consciousness is not a fixed possession, but a shifting landscape we wander each day. As you listen now, your own consciousness is shaping itself moment by moment. The flow of these words, the images they spark, the drift of your attention, even the drowsiness that may be gently arriving, All of these are states of awareness, nudged by context, by body, by mind. You're already an experiment, living the mystery from within. And so, we close this part of the journey with a realization. Consciousness is not only mysterious in its origins, but also delicate in its presence. It can be silenced, dreamed, expanded, or dissolved. It is not a single flame, but many shapes of fire, flickering and bending depending on the winds that blow. And as we move forward into the realm of philosophy and theories, we'll carry with us the knowledge that this glow is fragile, precious, and endlessly changeable. Just like the candlelight that flickers in a quiet room, sometimes steady, sometimes gone, always inviting us to wonder at its return. Imagine a quiet town in the days before radios, before printing presses, before any kind of instant communication. The people go about their business. Bakers kneading dough, children chasing one another in the dust, merchants arranging goods on wooden stalls. News arrives in fragments. A whisper here, a rumour there, a scrap of parchment carried by a traveller. Life is small, local, private. But then, one morning the town crier steps into the square. He lifts a bronze bell, rings it once, and in a clear voice announces the latest events. The king has issued a decree. A storm is moving in from the coast. The market will close early tomorrow. Suddenly, the news belongs not to one person, but to everyone. The baker knows, the children know, the merchants know. And once it is spoken aloud in the square, life rearranges itself in response. This simple scene captures the spirit of what neuroscientists call the global neuronal workspace theory. The name may sound technical, but at its heart is an image very much like the town square. The brain is filled with countless local processes, tiny villages of neurons carrying on their business. One set recognizes shapes, another monitors your heartbeat, another stores the sound of your grandmother's laugh. Most of the time, these processes hum quietly in the background, each doing its work in relative isolation. But sometimes, a piece of information is lifted up, amplified, and broadcast so widely that every system in the brain can hear it. That is when it becomes conscious. Think of glancing at your phone. Dozens of apps may be updating silently, calendars syncing, emails arriving, messages waiting. Most of this happens without you noticing. But then one notification buzzes to the surface. It is displayed on the screen, brightly lit, impossible to miss. At that moment, it is not just one app's secret, it is your awareness. The global workspace is like that screen, the place where information is lit up and shared with the whole network. The beauty of this model is that it turns consciousness into something functional, something you can picture, without slipping into metaphysical puzzles. Consciousness, in this view, is what happens when information is not locked in one corner, but spread through the system. A face you see is no longer just an arrangement of lines in your visual cortex. It becomes a recognized friend because memory systems are informed, emotions are triggered, language is engaged, and plans are adjusted. Once broadcast, the information reshapes the whole. In experiments, scientists see this broadcast as a kind of ignition. When a stimulus is presented briefly below the threshold of awareness, the brain responds locally. Just a flicker in the visual area, gone in a moment. But when you truly notice something, a word, an image, a sound, the activity spreads. It leaps to frontal regions, to parietal regions, to memory and attention systems. It is as if the town crier has rung his bell and the news is coursing down every street. Of course, like every theory, this one has its critics. Some argue that the broadcast is not the experience itself, only its consequence. Others point out that the metaphor risks being too simple, that the brain's broadcasting is not one announcement, but many overlapping shouts, some heard, some half lost in noise. But even with these cautions, the global workspace gives us a gentle way to picture awareness, as a signal lit up for all the mind's villages to see. You can notice this in your own life. Imagine walking home while distracted, your mind drifting through worries or memories. A car passes but you do not really see it. A bird sings but you do not really hear it. Then suddenly, someone calls your name. The sound is pulled into the spotlight and at once your whole system reorganizes. Attention shifts, heart rate quickens, posture adjusts, thoughts scatter. One word, broadcast, changes everything. That moment, that sudden reorientation, is what the global workspace is meant to capture. Even something as simple as tasting soup illustrates it. At first, you sip without thinking, lost in conversation. The flavour is present but unnoticed, like an actor rehearsing off stage. But then, a sharp spice catches your tongue, and instantly it is broadcast. You register surprise, you reach for water, you comment aloud. The sensation becomes conscious not because the spice was absent before, but because now it has been shouted across the brain square commanding attention. And there is a poetic comfort in this image, for it suggests that consciousness is not a hidden substance or a ghost in the machine, but an act of sharing. Awareness is what happens when the scattered processes of the brain stop working alone and instead hold something in common. It is not only a broadcast, but a kind of communion, and perhaps that is why conscious moments feel richer, more personal, more alive, because they are not just events in one corner of the mind, but gatherings where the whole self participates. As you listen now, this very act is unfolding in you. The words strike your ears, travel through sensory channels, and then, if they matter, are lifted into the workspace. Your attention, your memory, your emotions all tune in, and if you drift, if your mind wanders towards sleep, then the broadcast softens, like a town crier who has finished speaking, letting the marketplace settle back into the hush of ordinary business. So the global broadcast theory does not solve the hard problem, but it gives us a stage on which to watch awareness at play. Consciousness here is less a riddle than a rhythm, less a substance than a signal. It is the bell ringing in the square, the notification glowing on the screen, the soup spice demanding a reaction. And though the theory is scientific, it also whispers something more human, that what makes us awake to the world is the very act of being open, of letting experience echo widely through the chambers of the self. If the global broadcast paints consciousness as a town square where information is announced and shared, then another theory asks us to imagine not sounds spreading outward, but threads being woven inward. Rather than shouting news across the streets, consciousness may arise from how tightly and intricately the fabric of information itself is stitched together. This view is called integrated information theory, often abbreviated IIT, but tonight we can think of it simply as the woven tapestry of experience. Picture an old rug, one of those hand-woven carpets passed down through generations. At first glance, you see only its surface, the colours, the repeating patterns, the borders. But if you look closer, you notice that each curve of the design is built from countless tiny knots, every thread tied to another, no single strand standing alone. It is not just fabric, but story, woven into form, integrated information. Theory suggests that consciousness works in much the same way. The richness of our awareness comes not from isolated pieces, but from how tightly they are bound together into a whole. In this view, the brain is not a set of disconnected villages, but more like a loom where patterns of activity interlace. Each region contributes, but the magic lies in their integration. To see a red apple, for instance, you need colour recognition, shape detection, memory and emotion to be combined. If each worked alone, you might register red, or round, or food. But only when woven together do you experience the full presence of the apple before you, vivid and immediate. The theory even proposes a measure for this woven richness, a quantity called phi, or phi. We need not wrestle with its mathematics here. It is enough to imagine it as a measure of the thickness of the tapestry. A simple weave, a few loose threads, produces a fabric with little depth, but as the knots grow denser, the patterns more complex, the fabric becomes thicker, more substantial, harder to tear. So too, according to IIT, does consciousness grow richer as the integration of information deepens. A single photodiode might register light but has almost no tapestry. Its weave is thin, nearly flat. The human brain, by contrast, weaves billions of threads together, producing the thick, intricate carpet of human awareness. One of the most powerful ideas in IIT is that consciousness is not just about processing information, but about unifying it. Computers can process vast amounts of data, but if their processing is done in separate, isolated modules, the weave remains shallow. In contrast, when information is integrated so tightly that each part depends on every other, awareness emerges. It is like comparing a patchwork of disconnected cloth squares with a single rug where every knot belongs to the same design. There is a poetic echo of this in daily life. Think of baking bread. Flour, yeast, water, salt, each on its own is ordinary, almost lifeless. But knead them together, let them rise, bake them in heat, and they fuse into something entirely new. Bread, warm and fragrant, impossible to separate back into its ingredients. Consciousness, says IIT, is like that. More than the sum of its parts, woven so thoroughly that no single thread can be teased apart without unravelling the whole. Critics of IIT argue that the theory risks being too abstract, that calculating phi for complex systems may be impossible in practice, that it leans toward a kind of panpsychism by implying even small systems with some integration might have a faint glimmer of awareness. But supporters find beauty in its simplicity. It explains why awareness feels unified, why we do not experience colours, shapes, and sounds as separate fragments, but as one seamless world. Think of a rug again. You never notice the individual knots while walking across it. You see only the unified design. Similarly, you do not feel the millions of neurons firing in your brain. You feel the scene they weave together. A room, a voice, a memory. The pattern is what you live inside. Experiments lend hints that this weaving matters. Under deep sleep or anesthesia, integration between brain regions weakens, and the tapestry thins. During waking consciousness or dreaming, connections grow richer and more widespread, producing a denser weave. Psychedelic states too often show unusual patterns of integration, threads interlacing in ways they rarely do in ordinary life, leading to the heightened kaleidoscopic richness of those experiences. Perhaps you can feel this tapestry even now. Notice how the words you are hearing are not separate bits of sound, but part of a single flowing experience. The hum of the room around you, the comfort of your body at rest, the drift of your own thoughts, all are being woven into one continuous fabric. That unity is so natural we hardly remark upon it, but IIT reminds us that it may be the very essence of consciousness, the loom always at work, knotting experience into a whole. There is a quiet reassurance in this idea, for if consciousness is integration, then each moment of awareness is a reminder that we're not scattered, not broken into fragments, but whole. Even when attention drifts, even when memories fade, the tapestry continues weaving, holding the pieces together. And perhaps that is why consciousness feels so precious. It is the fabric of ourselves, thickened by every thread of sensation, thought, and memory, bound into a pattern that no one else can fully see but you. As we step onward into other theories, we carry with us this image of the woven rug, the integrated fabric. The global workspace showed us the town square where news is shouted aloud. Integrated information theory shows us the loom where threads are tied into wholeness. Both offer glimpses, neither the final answer. And perhaps in their metaphors we see what science itself is doing, weaving observations together, broadcasting discoveries outward, slowly creating a larger fabric of understanding that glows with its own kind of consciousness. Sometimes the most mysterious thing about consciousness is not that we have thoughts at all, but that we can notice ourselves having them. You might be sitting at a desk staring out the window as your mind drifts away into some wandering story. Perhaps you imagine yourself on a beach, hearing gulls in the distance, or maybe you replay a conversation from years ago. Then suddenly a small shift happens. You realise, I'm daydreaming. That little moment of awareness, that step back from the thought, is what certain philosophers and neuroscientists call the key to consciousness itself. It is not the thought, but the thought of the thought that truly counts. This perspective is known as the higher order thought theory, though we need not be tangled by the name. The essential idea is simple. A mental state becomes conscious not only when it exists, but when the mind also represents itself as having that state. A feeling of fear becomes a conscious fear when you know that you are afraid. The thought of an apple becomes conscious when you know that you are thinking of an apple. Consciousness, in this view, is the mirror that the mind holds up to itself. Think of walking past a mirror in a dim hallway. At first, you see only the hallway, the floor beneath you, the walls stretching forward. Then, for a moment, you glimpse yourself. The hallway was already there, but the reflection adds another layer, turning the scene into something more self-aware. Hot theory suggests that our mental life works like this. Thoughts and feelings happen all the time, but they become luminous when reflected upon, when the inner mirror catches them and presents them back to us. This simple act of reflection makes all the difference. Consider fear again. Deep within the brain, circuits respond to danger with lightning speed, raising your heart rate, tightening your muscles, sharpening your senses. This is the raw machinery of survival. But what makes the experience of fear, the chilling realization that you are frightened, is the higher order recognition, I am afraid. Without it, the body might still tremble, but you would not feel the trembling as your own. There is a subtle beauty in this idea. It suggests that consciousness is not an extra ingredient sprinkled on top of mental life, but a loop. The mind turns inward, representing itself, and in doing so lights up with awareness. You might think of it as a candle standing in front of a mirror. The flame is already there, burning steadily, but when the mirror catches it, suddenly the room is brighter, filled not only with the flame but with its reflection, echoing its glow. In everyday life, we notice this most often in those brief, almost humorous realizations, like catching ourselves distracted while trying to read a book, or suddenly noticing the tension in our shoulders and thinking, I must be stressed. But it is not only in small moments. The very fabric of our conscious lives may depend on this higher order reflection. To experience joy is one thing. To know, I am joyful is another, richer thing. To grieve is one thing. To realize I am grieving is to step into an experience of selfhood shaped by emotion. This mirror model also offers insight into how consciousness can fade or fracture. When someone is under anesthesia, perhaps the lower order states remain, the body still registers signals, but the higher order recognition, the self-reflecting loop, is silenced. In dreams, the mirror functions in strange ways. Thoughts and images spill forth, but only rarely do we notice ourselves dreaming while dreaming, and in certain neurological conditions the mirror may crack, leading to disorienting experiences where people act but do not fully recognize the thoughts or feelings as their own. One fascinating implication is that consciousness is not only about what we think, but about what we think about thinking. This can sound circular, but it is part of what makes awareness so rich. Just as in literature, a story can contain another story, a tale told by a character inside a tale. Our minds may hold thoughts about thoughts, feelings about feelings, layers upon layers woven into the experience we call consciousness. And here too, everyday analogies can soften the complexity. Imagine a theatre once more. Actors move on stage, delivering lines, acting out the play, but up in the balcony sits another observer, watching the actors narrating. This is what is happening on the stage. The play itself is the lower order thought. The balcony narrator is the higher order thought, the recognition that transforms the performance into something reflected upon. Without the balcony, the play still happens. But with it, the drama becomes conscious, illuminated by commentary. Critics of hot theory note that it may not explain the raw feeling itself. After all, does recognizing fear explain why it feels the way it does? Or does it simply account for why the fear is reported, remembered, integrated? Perhaps the glow of consciousness is not entirely captured by reflection alone. But even if incomplete, the theory gives us a profound metaphor. Consciousness as a mirror, awareness as the mind doubled back upon itself, a flame made brighter by its own reflection. And as you listen, you may notice this in action. Words arrive as sound, but then you recognize, I am listening. Your eyes may feel heavy, and then you think, I am growing drowsy. These higher order recognitions are like gentle mirrors you carry inside, catching experience and handing it back to you with the soft label mine. It is a reminder that consciousness is not something floating above us, but something we practice every moment, often without noticing. The art of knowing that we know, the quiet self-reflection that turns living into lived experience. In this theory's light, even drifting towards sleep has meaning. Thoughts blur, reflections dim, and soon the mirror fogs over. Awareness fades not because the stage goes empty, but because the balcony falls silent. And when you wake again, it is as if the mirror has been wiped clear, and once more you see yourself reflected. Once more the mind looks back at itself and quietly whispers, "Here I am." Sometimes the mind is like a sailor at sea, staring at a map that is not the ocean itself but a simplified drawing of it. The sailor does not need every ripple and current, every drop of salt water sketched in detail. What he needs is a guide, something abstract but useful, that shows where the winds are, where the shoals lie, where safe passage might be found. In much the same way, some scientists suggest that the brain creates a simplified map, not of the outside world, but of its own attention. And from that inner map, they argue, what we call awareness may quietly emerge. This idea is known as the attention schema theory, proposed by neuroscientist Michael Graziano. Though the name might sound technical, the essence is surprisingly gentle. The brain, forever busy, builds a cartoon version of what it is focusing on, and that cartoon is what we experience as awareness. Just as a weather map reduces the swirling chaos of storms into simple icons of sun and rain, the brain reduces the vast complexity of attention into something more manageable, something we can use to guide ourselves. Imagine you're sitting at a kitchen table, a cup of tea steaming before you. You may believe you're directly aware of the tea, the warmth, the aroma, the colour of the liquid. But according to this view, what you're experiencing is not the tea itself, but the brain's sketch of its own act of attending to the tea. The awareness feels vivid and direct, but in fact it is like the sailor's map, simplified, stripped down, enough to steer by but not the ocean itself. This reframing carries a surprising implication. Perhaps the glow of consciousness, the way experiences feel lit from within, is not a fundamental property of reality, but a kind of illusion created by this cartoon. The brain does not represent every detail of its processes, only the essentials, and so what we call awareness may be the brain's own storytelling, a trick that helps it manage itself. At first, this might sound deflating, even a little unsettling. To call awareness an illusion can feel like denying the very thing most immediate to us. But illusion here does not mean non-existence. Think again of the weather map. The sun icon on the map is not the sun itself, but that does not mean the map is useless. In fact, it is precisely its simplicity that gives it value. If the map tried to replicate the weather in all its detail, it would be overwhelming, impossible to read. The simplification is what makes it helpful. Likewise, the brain's sketch of its own attention may not be the full story, but it is the version that helps us navigate our world. Consider a more ordinary example, the little cartoon avatar on your phone's GPS. It is not you, it is not even a realistic drawing, but it is enough for the system to guide you through streets. The attention schema suggests that the brain builds a similar avatar of its own focus, a little cartoon that says, "This is what I'm attending to right now." We live inside that cartoon, and it feels like consciousness. There are hints of this in experiments. For instance, when people focus on a particular stimulus, say, a flashing light, the brain activity not only tracks the stimulus, but also builds a representation of the act of attending itself. This extra layer seems to help in shifting attention, in predicting what will be noticed next. The brain, in a sense, models itself, and that model becomes the feeling of awareness. This theory even has roots in how we treat others. From childhood onward, we learn to attribute awareness to those around us. We imagine that our parents, our friends, our pets, are conscious beings with attention directed here or there. The attention schema suggests we extend the same habit inward, treating ourselves as an agent with awareness. The cartoon is not only for self-navigation but for social life, allowing us to predict how others will act and how we ourselves will respond. Some philosophers have linked this to a broader idea called illusionism, the possibility that the subjective glow of experience is not a mysterious essence, but a helpful construct. If this sounds bleak, it may help to remember that our lives are filled with useful illusions. A rainbow is not a solid arc in the sky, but the illusion is beautiful, and it guides sailors and dreamers alike. Music feels like a flowing river, though it is only discrete vibrations in air. The illusion gives us joy. Perhaps consciousness is similar, a rainbow projected inward, a simplified cartoon, but no less wondrous for being a construction. And in daily life, this rings true in small ways. When you are deeply absorbed in a book, you may lose track of time, your attention narrowed to the page. Later you look up and feel surprised. Where did the hours go? The brain's cartoon of attention gave you the experience of immersion. Or when you sit quietly and feel self-conscious, it is as if the cartoon has turned inward, sketching your focus on yourself. In both cases, the cartoon shifts, and with it your sense of awareness shifts. There is a quiet poetry in the idea that our most intimate experience is also a kind of drawing. Awareness may be less like a grand lantern glowing at the centre of the mind, and more like a sketch on a page, fragile, useful, easily redrawn. Yet in its simplicity, it allows us to steer, to understand, to share. Perhaps that is why we feel awareness so strongly, because it is not meant to be perfect, only to be clear. As you listen, you may notice this sketch at work. Your attention drifts to the sound of words, then to the heaviness of your eyes, then to the comfort of the space you're in. Each time, the brain redraws its cartoon, and you live within that shifting outline. It is not the full sea of processes beneath, but it is enough for you to sail by. And if, as the night deepens, you slip into sleep, the cartoon will fade, the map will fold shut, and the storms of the mind will swirl without needing to be charted until morning redraws them once again. There is an old experiment in psychology that has become something of a legend, retold in classrooms and late-night conversations alike. Volunteers are shown a short video of two teams passing a basketball back and forth, one team dressed in white, the other in black. The task is simple: count how many passes the players in white make. People lean in, concentrating hard, eyes darting back and forth with the ball. Then the clip ends, the researcher smiles, and the question is asked, "Did you notice the gorilla?" Most people, bewildered, say no. And then they are shown the video again, and there it is, a person in a gorilla suit strolling calmly across the scene, pausing even to beat their chest, right in the middle of the game. The lesson is both humbling and strangely comforting. Our attention is so selective that we can miss something as large and absurd as a gorilla walking through the room if our focus is tightly locked elsewhere. This is called inattentional blindness, but we can think of it more simply as the blindness of focus, the way our spotlight of awareness illuminates some things while leaving others in shadow. You do not need a gorilla experiment to know this feeling. Imagine sitting at a cafe, absorbed in a book, the world around you fading into background noise. People come and go, cups clink, doors swing open, but you are barely aware, lost in the lines of text. Someone might even say your name once, twice, and only on the third time do you look up, blinking as though pulled out of another world. Or recall the experience of driving along a familiar road, thoughts drifting, and suddenly realizing you have passed a turn you meant to take, the sign invisible to you though it stood in plain view. In both cases, the gorilla walked right by and you did not see it. Awareness in this way is not a floodlight shining equally on everything, but a narrow, shifting beam. At any given moment, you're aware of a few things clearly. These words, perhaps the sensation of your breath, maybe a faint sound in the distance, while countless other details slip past unnoticed. Your shirt brushing your skin, the hum of an appliance, the tiny variations in the air's temperature, all remain in shadow. Only when the spotlight swings do they step briefly into view. Psychologists have long debated why the mind works this way. One answer is simple economy. The world contains far more information than any brain could process in full. Attention is the mind's way of rationing energy, focusing on what seems important, filtering the rest. Just as a theatre director cannot spotlight every corner of the stage at once, the mind highlights a few things and lets the rest fade into darkness. Consciousness, then, may be less a mirror of the world and more a carefully edited play, showing you only the scenes the director deems most vital. There is something both limiting and liberating in this. Limiting because it means that much of reality is forever hidden from us, not because it is absent, but because we are not looking. But liberating because it reveals how pliable awareness is, how it can be trained, shifted, expanded. Meditation, for instance, is often described as the practice of noticing the gorilla. That is, becoming aware of what usually slips by unnoticed, the texture of the breath, the rise of a thought, the subtle flicker of emotion. Children often live with broader spotlights. A walk to school can become a journey filled with wonders, ants on the sidewalk, patterns of light on the wall, clouds shaped like castles. Adults, their spotlights narrowed by tasks and worries, may walk the same street blind to it all. The gorillas of childhood magic still pass by, but the grown-up gaze does not turn. Inattentional blindness also explains why two people can share the same moment, but live entirely different experiences. At a concert, one friend might remember the precise notes of the violin, another the expressions of the players, another only the warmth of the crowd. Each had a spotlight trained on something different, and so each lived a slightly different world. Consciousness is not the objective scene, but the play of lights upon it. The gorilla experiment makes us smile because it seems absurd to miss something so obvious. But perhaps life is filled with invisible gorillas, things that pass quietly by while we count passes or chase goals, absorbed in the small tasks of the day. How many conversations have slipped past unheard because our minds were elsewhere? How many sunsets went unnoticed while we stared at glowing screens? And how many small gestures of kindness, fleeting but real, were missed because we were focused on something else entirely? The softness of this realization is not meant to scold, but to invite a gentler way of seeing. If awareness is selective, we might choose at times to widen the beam, to let more of the stage glow. Not always, of course. The spotlight is necessary, it keeps us safe and efficient. But now and then, pausing to let the gorilla in the room be seen might make life richer, fuller, more whole. And perhaps, as you listen, you notice your own spotlight shifting. First on these words, then on the room around you, then on the rhythm of your breath. Each shift is a reminder. Consciousness is not fixed but moving, a beam wandering across the stage of the world. Even as your eyes grow heavier, even as the day fades, the light will keep shifting, catching details and missing others, until at last sleep arrives. The spotlight dims and the stage is left in quiet darkness. If you close your eyes for a moment and place your hand gently on the table, there is a quiet certainty that this hand is yours. You feel its weight, its warmth, the slight pressure against the surface beneath it, and there is no question. This belongs to me. But psychologists have shown that this sense of ownership, this feeling of mine, is far more fragile than we assume. With the right tricks, the mind can be persuaded to claim something false as its own, or to deny what truly belongs. It is as if the body is less a fortress of identity than a costume you can slip into and out of, a borrowed set of clothes that your awareness wears for a while. One of the most famous demonstrations of this fragility is called the rubber hand illusion. A volunteer sits at a table with one of their arms hidden from view, tucked out of sight behind a screen. In its place, on the table before them, rests a lifelike rubber hand. Then, in a gentle, rhythmic fashion, the experimenter strokes both the hidden, real hand and the visible rubber hand with small brushes in perfect synchrony. Within a minute or two, something astonishing happens. The volunteer begins to feel as though the rubber hand is their own. When the brush touches the rubber fingers, they swear they can feel it. If the experimenter suddenly threatens the rubber hand with a hammer, the volunteer flinches, heart rate quickening, as though their very body were under attack. It is a simple trick, almost a child's game, but it reveals something profound. The mind does not passively record the body. It constructs it, stitching together signals of sight, touch, and expectation into a seamless whole. If those signals are rearranged just right, the mind can adopt a fake hand, claiming it as part of the self. What feels like an anchor of certainty, this hand is mine, is actually a flexible story woven by the brain. The story becomes even more curious when we consider split-brain patients, individuals who have undergone surgery that severs the corpus callosum, the great bridge of fibres connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. In daily life, many of these people seem remarkably normal, able to walk, talk, and carry out ordinary tasks. But in controlled experiments, a stranger picture emerges. When information is shown only to the right hemisphere, the left hand may respond correctly, pointing or drawing, even as the person insists aloud, using their left hemisphere's language centres, that they saw nothing. It is as though two streams of consciousness flow in parallel within the same skull, each aware of things the other cannot fully articulate. What does this mean for the sense of I? If one brain can hold two semi-independent minds, then perhaps the self we feel so singular, so indivisible, is not as unified as it seems. Instead, it may be another story the brain tells, stitching together fragments into the illusion of a single, coherent narrator. The picture grows stranger still with the phenomenon called blind sight. Certain patients with damage to the primary visual cortex report total blindness in parts of their visual field. Show them an object in the blind area, and they insist they see nothing. And yet, if asked to guess the object's location or movement, they perform far above chance, sometimes with uncanny accuracy. They can respond to what they cannot consciously see, a reminder that perception and awareness are not identical. The world can be processed, acted upon, even navigated, without ever stepping into the glow of consciousness. Taken together, these cases whisper a disquieting truth. The sense of self, of body, of I, as a unified being, is delicate, constructed, and sometimes easily deceived. What we take for granted as the foundation of identity is in fact the outcome of a complex dance between brain and body, between sensation and story. It is not a solid stone, but a tapestry woven moment by moment, vulnerable to illusions and fractures. Yet there is no need to feel unsettled. There is also a certain beauty in this fragility. It means that who you are is not a rigid object, but a living, shifting process. Your body and mind are partners in a dance, adjusting to new rhythms, capable of adopting, of expanding, even of healing. If a rubber hand can become part of you for a moment, it suggests that the boundaries of self are not walls but open doors through which new experiences, new identities, and new forms of empathy might enter. Think of how naturally children extend their sense of self into toys, hugging a teddy bear as though it were part of their being, or how easily adults can feel fused with a car they are driving, wincing when it scrapes, as though their own skin had been touched. The body you borrow is not fixed. It stretches to include tools, clothes, instruments, even other people in moments of intimacy. The violinist feels the instrument vibrate as though it were an extension of their body. The dancer feels the partner's movement as though it were their own. In these moments, the self expands, flexes, and redefines its edges. So perhaps we need not mourn the fragility of the self, but celebrate it. To be human is to live inside a body that is both home and costume, both anchor and mask. The hand that feels so certain as yours today could, under the right circumstances, be replaced by rubber, wood, or even light in a virtual reality headset. The unity you feel in your thoughts may in fact be the stitching together of many voices, many fragments, into a choir that sings in harmony most of the time, though not always. And the sight you rely upon may sometimes extend into shadows you cannot see but can still respond to, as though another, quieter vision were guiding you. As you sit now, listening, you may notice how this body feels at once so certain and yet so borrowed. The chair holds you, but you might also feel as though you and the chair are one for the moment. The air brushes against your skin, and for an instant, the border between you and not you grows soft, almost uncertain. Awareness of self, it seems, is less about rigid lines and more about a flowing boundary, drawn anew each moment, fragile but also endlessly adaptable. Each night, when you close your eyes and drift into sleep, the curtain falls on the outside world. These sounds of the street, the light in the room, the demands of the day all fade into silence, and yet, paradoxically, you do not simply vanish into darkness. Instead, your mind spins up entire theatres of its own, filled with landscapes, voices, stories, and scenes that can feel as vivid as waking life. A door opens, and you step into a dream. Dreams are remarkable not because they exist, we have all known them, but because of how convincingly real they can feel while we are inside them. During the phase of sleep, known as REM, rapid eye movement, the brain becomes nearly as active as it is when awake. The body lies still, muscles paralyzed by design, but inside a full inner movie is projected, often with wild plots and impossible transitions, yet stitched together so seamlessly that you rarely question it until you awaken. You may find yourself running through an endless hallway, flying above a city, speaking with someone long gone, or reliving a memory that never quite happened the way you remember. In these moments, consciousness does not need the outside world at all. It generates its own. Scientists have long puzzled over the purpose of dreams. Are they rehearsals for survival, practicing responses to threats? Are they the brain's way of processing memories, weaving fragments into longer tapestries? Or are they simply byproducts of a restless mind, playful chaos with no function beyond existing? Whatever their origin, they remind us that consciousness is not tethered to external reality. The sense of presence, of being somewhere, can arise entirely from within, a theatre without a stage. This theatre is not limited to sleep. Psychedelic substances, used in some cultures for centuries in rituals and healing practices, provide another window into the mind's ability to generate worlds from within. Under their influence, people report visions that feel vast and profound. Kaleidoscopes of colour, encounters with beings of light, journeys through landscapes both alien and familiar. The brain, loosened from its usual patterns, seems to paint with a wilder palette, dissolving the boundaries between self and world, past and future. Even though there may be no external object corresponding to these visions, the experiences carry weight, sometimes reshaping lives, inspiring art, or shifting beliefs. What connects dreams and hallucinations, whether chemically induced or born of sleep, is the realization that consciousness is not simply about mirroring reality. Instead, it seems to thrive on coherence, on the crafting of a story that feels whole while we are in it. A dream does not need to obey the laws of physics to feel true. It only needs to flow from moment to moment in a way the mind can ride along with. In the same way, a hallucination may present impossible sights, yet they are often bound by an internal logic that feels meaningful at the time. Consciousness, then, is less like a camera recording the world, and more like a novelist spinning a tale, concerned not with accuracy, but with immersion. Think of the last dream you remember. Perhaps it began in one place and ended in another without explanation. You might have been both yourself and someone else, or you might have shifted from one scene to another with no transition at all, and yet, in the dream, it felt seamless. Waking life is not so different. The brain stitches together fragments of perception, memory and expectation, filling in gaps without our noticing. The result is a continuous stream we call reality, but in truth it is just as constructed as a dream, just more tightly bound to external inputs. Even hallucinations that arise without drugs or sleep can reveal this. Some people, especially those who lose sight or hearing, report vivid sensory experiences generated entirely by the brain. A person who has been blind for years might still see flashes of landscapes or faces in what is known as Charles Bonnet syndrome. The mind, starved of input, invents its own imagery. Far from being evidence of a malfunction, it shows how deeply consciousness yearns to tell a story, to populate the stage even when the actors fail to arrive. If this all feels fragile, if it makes you wonder whether your waking life is just another dream, it may help to think of coherence itself as the anchor. What sets waking experience apart is not that it is more real, but that it is constantly checked against the world outside. You reach for a cup, and it resists your hand with solid weight. You walk through a door, and the hallway remains there no matter how often you test it. Dreams and hallucinations can dazzle, but they lack this constant grounding. The story they tell is coherent only as long as it is untested. Waking life is coherent because it survives endless tests. And yet, the very fact that dreams and hallucinations exist at all points to something essential about consciousness. It is not just a mirror of reality, but a creator of realities. It does not sit passively reflecting the world. It actively constructs the experience of being in a world, whether one exists around you or not. Consciousness is, in this sense, the world builder, the weaver of inner movies that give us a sense of place, time, and self. Perhaps that is why both dreams and hallucinations, though sometimes unsettling, are often described with wonder. They show us the artistry of the mind, the hidden creativity that underlies even our most ordinary moments. They remind us that what we experience each day is not raw reality, but a carefully crafted tale. Less about truth than about coherence, less about accuracy than about presence. And in that realization there is a kind of peace. If your mind can create whole worlds each night from nothing, then perhaps the waking world too is more malleable, more filled with possibility than it sometimes seems. So, as you drift tonight, Notice how easily your inner theatre may open. One moment you're here, listening to words, the next you may find yourself elsewhere, wandering through a dream that feels as real as this moment. The projector of consciousness does not stop. It only shifts reels from waking story to dreaming one, from daylight coherence to midnight imagination. And wherever it takes you, it is still you, still the glow of awareness weaving another tale in the quiet dark. When you hold a kettle of water over the stove and wait for it to boil, the transformation is almost magical. For a long time there is only quiet simmering, a faint trembling of the surface, and then suddenly steam begins to rise, curling and drifting into the air. Nobody doubts that the steam comes from the water. It is not something separate, not something alien. It is simply what water does when heated enough. For many thinkers, consciousness is like that steam, an emergent property of matter when arranged in the right way. Put enough neurons together, allow electricity to ripple through them in complex patterns, and the result, they argue, is awareness. This view is called materialism or sometimes physicalism, the idea that everything that exists is physical, including us, including our minds. In this perspective, thoughts and feelings are not made of any special substance. They are simply the byproducts of physical activity in the brain, no more mysterious than the steam from the kettle. The warmth you feel when holding a friend's hand, the ache of missing someone, the spark of inspiration. All of it is matter, moving in particular ways, molecules shifting, electrical charges flowing. Nothing more is needed to explain it. There is a comfort in this view. It makes the world orderly, comprehensible, governed by the same laws everywhere. Just as steam arises from boiling, consciousness arises from brains. It is natural, not supernatural. We can imagine mapping it, predicting it, perhaps even building it one day, the way we build machines. And yet, even within the simplicity lies unease. For while we can explain the steam, can measure its temperature, density and speed, consciousness feels different. It is not just matter moving, it is the glow of experience itself, the what it is like to be alive. Steam is visible to all. The ache of longing is visible only to the one who feels it. This unease is what leads some thinkers back toward dualism, the ancient view most famously described by René Descartes in the 17th century. Descartes believed there were two kinds of substance in the universe: matter, extended in space, and mind, unextended, invisible, but real. The body and the mind, he argued, are distinct. The body is a machine, following physical laws, while the mind is the seat of thought, will and feeling. His famous line, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, was meant to show that even if every physical thing were doubted, the existence of mind could not be. But dualism carries its own puzzles. If the mind and the body are truly separate, how do they interact? How does an immaterial thought, say, the desire to lift your arm, cause the physical muscles to contract? And how does the light entering your eyes, travelling through nerves as electrical signals, become the experience of seeing a sunset? If the mind is a shadow, and the body the object, how do they touch? The question has haunted philosophers for centuries, and yet, even if materialism promises neat answers and dualism promises depth, both can feel incomplete in different ways. Materialism risks explaining too much away, treating the rich glow of experience as mere byproduct, reducing love to chemistry and awe to neurons firing. Dualism risks creating a gulf too wide, two worlds forever struggling to meet. To soften these puzzles, perhaps it helps to return to the metaphors of ordinary life. Think again of the kettle, steam rising from boiling water. It seems natural, but notice that steam is not identical to water. It has its own texture, its own form, though it depends entirely on the water beneath. In the same way, perhaps consciousness is dependent on matter but not reducible to it, emerging from it yet with a character all its own. Or think of a shadow on the ground. The shadow depends completely on the object that casts it. Without the object, the shadow cannot exist. But the shadow is not simply the object itself. It has a form, a presence, shaped by light and angle. Maybe consciousness is like that. The shadow cast by matter, inseparable from it, but not identical to it. The debate between materialism and dualism is less about solving the puzzle than about where we place our trust. Some trust in the simplicity of matter, believing that one day, with enough knowledge, the steam will be fully explained. Others trust in the irreducibility of mind, believing that no map of neurons will ever capture the felt spark of awareness. Both positions are attempts to make peace with the same mystery, that inside the machinery of life there is also the glow of being. And as you sit here, listening, you may notice how both metaphors, the steam and the shadow, live quietly in your own experience. Your body is undeniably material, cells humming with activity, molecules exchanging, atoms binding. And yet the story of your life, the warmth of your memories, the particular way this moment feels, these are not molecules, not shadows of chemistry. They are something else, the shimmer of being itself. Whether matter gives rise to mind or mind hovers apart from matter, the fact remains. You are here, present, alive in this fragile glow. And perhaps, in the end, it matters less which theory is right than that we continue to wonder, to let the steam rise, to watch the shadows move, and to marvel at the mystery that they never quite capture. Imagine looking at a glowing computer screen late at night. From a distance you see a picture, maybe a face, a tree, or a stretch of sky filled with stars. It feels continuous, smooth, vivid. But lean closer, closer still, until your eyes nearly touch the glass, and the illusion breaks apart. The image dissolves into tiny dots of light, pixels, each almost meaningless on its own, but together weaving something rich and alive. Now, some philosophers and scientists wonder if consciousness might be like that. What if every piece of matter in the universe, every atom, every particle, carries within it the faintest shimmer of experience? Not thoughts, not plans, not anything we would call a mind, but the smallest whisper of subjectivity, so faint as to be almost nothing at all. And yet, when gathered together in vast networks, such as in the brain, the tiny glimmers combine into the blaze of awareness we know. This view is called panpsychism, from the Greek for all and soul. At first, the idea can sound absurd. Does a rock feel? Does an electron worry? Does a speck of dust dream? Panpsychism does not mean these things, not exactly. It does not claim that a pebble has opinions or that a star is pondering the meaning of life. Instead, it suggests that consciousness may not appear suddenly, like a light switched on in an empty room, but rather exists as a spectrum, from the dimmest glow to the brightest flame. The pebble may not think, but it may carry in its being the tiniest trace of what, in you, has become thought and feeling. Consider how life itself is built from the lifeless. A human body is nothing more than atoms arranged in a particular way, the same carbon and oxygen and hydrogen found in stones and air, and yet, in this arrangement, something astonishing emerges: breath, heartbeat, sensation. If life can emerge from non-life, perhaps consciousness can emerge from proto-consciousness, the faint seeds already scattered in the smallest particles. Some find this view elegant because it closes the gap between matter and mind. If every atom already carries a faint inner side, then the leap to full awareness is not so mysterious. It is not a sudden miracle but a gradual accumulation, like pixels forming a picture, or single notes joining to form a symphony. The universe, then, is not dead matter accidentally giving rise to mind, but a living fabric woven through and through with potential for awareness. Think of a field of grass on a summer day. Each blade bends gently in the wind, insignificant on its own, but together they ripple like waves, creating a moving sea of green. Or think of the murmur of a crowd in a great hall. Each voice, heard alone, is faint and unremarkable, but together they become a presence that fills the air. In this way, panpsychism invites us to see consciousness not as a rare spark, but as a vast, continuous field, with different places glowing more brightly than others. Critics of this idea point out that it risks explaining everything and therefore nothing. If even an electron is conscious in some sense, then the word conscious begins to lose its sharpness. How can we compare the inner life of a human to the feeling of a particle, if such a thing exists? And yet, perhaps the value of panpsychism is not in the precision it offers, but in the humility it invites. Instead of declaring consciousness to be a latent local accident, it imagines it as something woven into the fabric of reality from the start. In this way, panpsychism echoes ancient traditions. Indigenous philosophies, for example, often speak of rivers, mountains, and trees as alive, not just in the biological sense, but in spirit. The animistic worldview, common across cultures, holds that everything in nature has its own vitality, its own inner glow. Panpsychism, stripped of its mystical language, becomes a scientific cousin to these beliefs, suggesting that perhaps our ancestors were not so naive after all. They simply intuited what modern thinkers are daring to suggest, that the world is not a cold machine but a living cosmos. There is also something quietly comforting in this view. If every atom has, even the faintest trace of experience, then you're not alone in the universe of matter. The bed beneath you, the air you breathe, the stars that shine, they are not entirely mute, not entirely alien. They share, in their own hidden way, in the same story of awareness. You're not a stranger in a world of dead stone, you are kin to it. And perhaps this kinship reshapes how we see ourselves. If consciousness is scattered everywhere, then its highest value may not be in being rare, but in being able to deepen, to become richer, to weave itself into forms that can love, create, reflect, and wonder. The human mind, then, is not the lonely bearer of a miraculous spark, but one flowering among many, part of a continuum that stretches from quark to galaxy. As you listen now, you might picture yourself as a pixel in a vast cosmic screen, glowing faintly, yet connected to all the others, together forming an image too immense to see all at once. Or as a blade of grass in the endless meadow of the universe, swaying with the same wind that moves every other. The idea of panpsychism may or may not be literally true, but as a way of seeing, it offers a soft invitation to imagine that wherever you look, at stone, at tree, at sky, you're gazing into something that is not wholly dark inside, but faintly, quietly alive. Hold a coin in your hand. Turn it over once and you see one face. Turn it again and you see the other. Heads, tails, two sides, one coin. They can never be separated. You cannot have the heads without the tails, nor the tails without the heads. They belong together, not as two things awkwardly glued, but as one reality appearing in two ways. This is the heart of dual aspect theories of consciousness. They suggest that the physical and the mental, the objective and the subjective, are not two separate substances battling for contact, nor is one fully reducible to the other. Instead, they are two aspects of the same underlying reality. Matter and mind are not enemies, nor are they steam and kettle, nor shadow and object. They are one coin, two faces. Think of light, for example. Sometimes it behaves as a particle, sometimes as a wave, depending on how you look at it. Which is it truly? The answer is both, and neither. Its reality is deeper than either description. Perhaps consciousness and matter are like that. Seen from outside, they appear as brain activity, patterns of firing neurons. Seen from inside, they appear as feelings, colours, sounds, thoughts. Two ways of witnessing one process. This view has a certain gentle elegance. It avoids the stark reduction of materialism, where mind is treated as an illusion, and it avoids the impossible gap of dualism, where mind and matter are cast as strangers trying to shake hands across a void. Instead, it says, both views are true, both necessary, both belonging to a larger picture we do not yet fully see. Now, some thinkers take this even further, moving from dual aspect theory into the realm of idealism. Here the suggestion is bold. What we call matter may itself be a face of mind. Reality at its foundation might be mental, not physical. The solidity of the world, the laws of physics, the stars and stones and seas, may be more like a shared dream than a machine of gears and cogs. Imagine a dream you once had. In it you may have walked through a house, touched a wall, heard voices, felt fear or joy. Everything seemed solid, coherent, real. And yet, when you awoke, you realized that it was all mind stuff, woven from thought and memory and imagination. Nothing in the dream was made of wood or stone, yet it felt as real as waking life. The idealist wonders, what if waking life itself is like that dream? What if the stuff of reality is not atoms but mind? To some, this feels liberating. If the world is mind-like, then consciousness is not a puzzling byproduct, not a strange spark in a dark universe, but the very ground of existence. It is not a guest in the house of matter, it is the house itself. The universe, then, is not indifferent machinery, but living thought, and your awareness is not a local accident, but a window into the very fabric of reality. But to others, this feels dizzying. If all is mind, how do we explain the stubborn resistance of the world? The way the table holds your cup whether you believe in it or not? The way the laws of physics do not bend to whim? Idealism does not deny this resistance. It simply suggests that it is part of the dream's coherence. Just as in sleep you cannot fly through walls at will unless the dream allows it, in waking life the dream of matter has its own rules. In the gentle tension between dual aspect theory and idealism, there is room for reflection. Perhaps reality is neither entirely material nor entirely mental, but both at once, like that coin in your hand. Or perhaps the coin itself is woven of thought, and matter is simply the pattern that thought takes when it becomes consistent, measurable, and shareable. Everyday experience hints at this if we look closely. Consider music. To the physicist, it is vibrations in the air, measurable in frequencies and amplitudes. To the listener, it is melody, rhythm, joy, sorrow. Both are true, both aspects of the same event. One without the other is incomplete. Or think of a painting. Physically, it is pigment on canvas, molecules arranged in particular patterns. But as experience, it is depth, light, story, emotion. Again, two sides of one coin. Perhaps consciousness and matter are like that, endlessly intertwined, each incomplete without the other. Science, in its noble quest, measures the pigments, the vibrations, the neurons. Spirit and philosophy remind us of the music, the light, the lived story. To privilege one side entirely is to hold the coin flat and see only its thinness. To turn it slowly back and forth is to begin to glimpse its wholeness. And as you rest with this thought, you may notice a kind of quiet relief. You do not need to choose between being a machine of molecules or a soul adrift in matter. You can be both, body and mind, neuron and dream, coin turning gently in the hand of reality. The solidity of the world and the shimmer of your inner life may not be enemies but partners. Two languages spoken by the same universe, telling the same story in different accents. Picture a darkened room. On the table sits a simple lamp. Around it scattered objects, perhaps a book, a cup, a folded blanket. The lamp glows quietly, sending out its steady light. Because of that light, you can see the book, the cup, the blanket. The lamp does not choose what to illuminate. It does not alter its glow depending on whether the object is beautiful or plain, valuable or trivial. It simply shines, and through that shining, everything else becomes visible. And yet, if you turn your gaze to the lamp itself, you realize it is not illuminated by anything else. It is the source. This is the image often used in Advaita Vedānta, a philosophical tradition from India that has been explored for centuries and carried today by teachers such as Swami Sarvapriyananda. According to Vedānta, consciousness is not something produced by the brain, not a steam rising from boiling matter, not a coin with two sides. It is the lamp itself, the light of lights, self-luminous, revealing all but never revealed by another. In this view, every experience you have, whether of the warmth of sunlight on your face, the sharpness of grief, or the taste of sweet fruit, is a combination of two things: the object of experience and the consciousness that makes it known. Objects come and go. Today's sunrise fades into night. Today's joy dissolves into tomorrow's sorrow. Today's thought slips into forgetfulness. But what never changes is the fact that all of it appears in consciousness. It is the constant stage upon which the changing play of life is acted. The sages of Vedanta sometimes ask a simple but profound question. What is the one thing you never lose in experience? You can lose a memory. You can lose a feeling. You can lose a belief, even the sense of your own body. But you never lose the awareness that these things have appeared. Even in deep sleep where objects vanish, consciousness itself remains, like the quiet background into which all dreams dissolve. When you awake, you do not think there was nothing, but rather, I slept well. The absence of objects was itself experienced. To explain this, Vedanta uses the metaphor of space. A pot may be filled with air, and when the pot breaks, the air seems to escape. But in truth, the air inside the pot was never different from the air outside. The pot simply appeared to divide it. In the same way, your individual mind is like a pot, shaping and holding consciousness in a particular form. But when the pot breaks, when the body dies, or in certain deep states of realization, the consciousness is revealed to be boundless, never divided, never broken. Western philosophy often approaches consciousness as a problem to solve. How does matter give rise to mind? How do neurons generate awareness? Vedanta turns the question inside out. It asks, how can matter appear at all, if not within consciousness? You cannot step outside consciousness to examine it. Everything you know because you are aware. Even the very idea of a brain, a neuron, a universe, comes to you as an appearance within awareness. Consciousness, then, is not a product to be explained, but the ground upon which every explanation rests. Some scientists and philosophers resist this, worrying that it drifts too far from testable evidence. After all, you cannot place pure consciousness in a scanner or measure it with electrodes. Yet for Vedanta, this is no weakness. The lamp does not need another light to shine on it. It is enough to notice that without it, nothing could ever be seen. There is also a kind of reassurance here. If consciousness is primary, not dependent on the fragile machinery of the brain, then it cannot be wholly lost. The brain may be like a radio, tuning and shaping the signal, but the broadcast is not created by the radio itself. Damage the radio, and the sound distorts. Turn it off, and the sound seems to vanish. But the broadcast continues, independent. In the same way, your individual awareness may falter, fade, or end, but consciousness itself remains, vast and unbroken. This view is not meant to dismiss science, but to complement it. Where science looks outward, charting the universe, Vedanta looks inward to the very fact of knowing. One studies the stars, the other studies the light by which the stars are seen. Both are needed for the full picture. You might find yourself resisting the idea, or perhaps feeling drawn to it. Either way, it offers a gentle shift of perspective. instead of seeing yourself as a fragile spark of awareness lit for a brief moment in an indifferent cosmos, you might see yourself as the cosmos itself, manifesting as awareness steady and luminous. The body may fall, the mind may wander, but the light remains unextinguished. So as you rest now, imagine yourself not as the pot, but as the space it holds, not as the objects, but as the lamp that lights them. You're not merely the character on the stage, but the stage itself, the background against which every scene unfolds, and in that recognition there is peace, for nothing can add to consciousness, and nothing can take it away. It is the silent witness, the still presence, the light of lights. Picture for a moment a sleek machine humming quietly in the corner of a room. It has no eyes, no heart, no childhood memories, yet it speaks when spoken to. Ask it a question, and it returns an answer. Give it a photograph, and it tells you what it sees. Feed it 1,000 stories, and it can spin a new one back to you. It can mimic a joke, complete a melody, even draft a letter of apology that might sound more sincere than the one you would write yourself. And so we wonder, is there anyone inside? Modern artificial intelligence, these vast networks of mathematics and computation, has reached a level of skill that can sometimes startle us. A poem composed in seconds, a medical image analysed with superhuman precision, a chess strategy beyond the imagination of human masters. It is easy to look at such performances and feel the old thrill of science fiction, the sense that machines are not just tools but minds awakening. But if we listen more carefully, what we find is not awakening but astonishing mimicry. A machine today does not know what it says. It does not feel the weight of sorrow in a line of poetry, nor the joy in a victorious chess move. It is more like a mirror, reflecting patterns that humans have already placed into the world, reshuffling and reassembling them in clever ways. This is no small feat. The mirror is large, deep, and dazzling. But it is not the same as having a view of its own. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once said that words get their meaning not from floating definitions, but from the way they are used in human life. Language is a game, he said, and we learn its rules by playing, by living, by sharing. A child learns the word pain, not by reading a dictionary, but by falling, scraping a knee, and having a parent rush in with concern. The meaning of pain is bound up with the lived experience of hurt, comfort, fear, and love. Machines can replay the word, even in the right context, but without the lived experience, the word is hollow. Think of a parrot. A parrot can be trained to say good morning, or even to recite a whole phrase with clarity. It can sound uncannily like a human voice. But we do not imagine the parrot truly understands the meaning of its own greeting. It has no sense of morning, no recognition of day and night as you do. It knows only the sound, linked to some reward. The performance can be delightful, but the inner life, the understanding, the experience is missing. In this way, today's AI resembles the parrot more than the poet. It can mimic meaning, echo patterns, produce the right words at the right time, but whether it knows anything about what it says remains deeply doubtful. When a machine writes the word sunset, it does not feel the warmth fading from the horizon or see the sky blushing red. It is combining statistical probabilities from countless sunsets described by countless human hands. The glow belongs to us, not to it. This distinction matters because it draws a boundary between intelligence and consciousness. Intelligence, in the sense of processing information, solving problems, producing appropriate outputs, can be immense without any accompanying awareness. Consciousness, on the other hand, is that subjective glow, the sense of being, the warmth or sting, the soft interior of experience. The hard problem of consciousness is not how a system performs, but how a system feels. And so far, machines show us performance without feeling. Still, the question lingers. Could this change? Could a machine ever cross from mimicry into true awareness? Some thinkers argue that if you build a system with enough complexity, The lights might simply turn on by themselves. Others argue that complexity alone is not enough. You could simulate digestion on a computer, step by step, enzyme by enzyme, but no one believes the machine is actually eating lunch. Simulation is not the same as reality. Perhaps simulating awareness is the same. No matter how detailed, it remains a shadow of the real thing. But what if awareness itself is a kind of structure, and structure can be recreated? If language gains its meaning through lived use, perhaps a machine that lived in the world, sensing, acting, making mistakes and learning, not just processing data but embodying experience, might cross the invisible line. Imagine a robot not merely analysing an apple but tasting it, craving it, feeling hunger and satisfaction. Could such a being begin to have not just information but experience? We do not know. The frontier is both scientific and philosophical, and perhaps ethical. For now, the evidence leans strongly toward the view that our machines, no matter how astonishing, are tools. Tools of immense cleverness, yes, but tools still. They extend our hands, our words, our imaginations, without having any of their own. When you ask a machine to tell you a bedtime story, it can produce one, but it does not drift to sleep alongside you, holding the image of its own story in its own mind. It does not dream, and maybe that is the point. Machines need not dream in order to be useful, or even beautiful in their utility. They are mirrors of us, and sometimes mirrors can show us things we would not otherwise see. They reflect our creativity back to us, sometimes in ways so novel that we forget it is still our reflection. But behind the mirror there is only the quiet hum of circuitry, no inner voice whispering "I am." As you sit with this thought, you might picture a parrot repeating words, a child learning meaning through pain and comfort, a machine weaving patterns from human stories. All three speak, but only one feels. The parrot repeats, the child understands, the machine calculates. And the mystery of consciousness, your consciousness, remains safe for now, glowing in ways no algorithm has yet been able to touch. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a dimmer switch. At one end of the dial, there is near darkness, a faint flicker of light. At the other end, the room is filled with brightness. The glow is continuous, never snapping suddenly from off to on, but shading gently through degrees. For some scientists, consciousness may be like this switch, not a binary property you either have or do not have, but a spectrum, a gradient shading from faint sparks to full brilliance. Consider an infant. In the earliest days of life, a baby's responses are simple: a cry of hunger, a reflexive grasp, the startle at a sudden sound. There is awareness here, but it is thin, like the soft glow of dawn. Over time, as the brain develops, the dimmer dial seems to turn. Awareness grows richer, more complex. The infant begins to recognize faces, to smile at voices, to play. By the time a child speaks, the room is filled with brighter light. Now think of animals. A dog clearly feels joy, wagging its tail with exuberance at the sight of its favourite human. A cat curls on your lap, purring, clearly content. Even a mouse navigating a maze seems to show curiosity, hesitation, and preference. Are these not forms of consciousness, perhaps simpler, less verbal, but nonetheless real? It would be strange to say a dog has no inner life, no experiences of pleasure or fear. The wag of its tail, the shiver of its body in a storm all suggest the dial is turned up, even if not to the level of human complexity. And beyond the familiar pets, we find stranger cases. Octopuses, with their alien bodies and distributed nervous systems, solve puzzles and escape aquariums with a flair that hints at awareness. Birds, like crows and parrots, use tools, recognize themselves in mirrors, and even hold grudges. Insects may seem too small, too simple. Yet bees can communicate through dances, navigate with remarkable precision, and show what some call cognitive flexibility. Each of these beings lights its corner of the spectrum in a way that reminds us Consciousness is not ours alone. This idea carries deep ethical weight. If awareness comes in degrees, then moral consideration cannot be reserved for humans alone. Testing cosmetics on rabbits, factory farming pigs, or keeping dolphins in confined tanks all take on heavier moral shadows if these creatures are not simply biological machines, but centres of experience, beings who feel the difference between comfort and pain. The spectrum asks us to expand our circle of empathy, not just to those who look like us or speak our language, but to all who share the gift of feeling in whatever form it appears. And then there is the future, machines again. If consciousness is a spectrum, then perhaps one day some artificial systems will light up the dial. They may not be conscious in the way we are, but in a way suited to their design, their embodiment, their form of sensing. The question becomes, how would we know? At what point do the patterns of behaviour, the signs of learning, the self-monitoring cross the threshold from clever mechanism to faint awareness? Here, the mirror becomes an evocative metaphor. A baby gazes into a mirror and eventually realises the reflection is not another child but itself. This recognition, that is me, marks a milestone in self-awareness. Many animals do not pass the mirror test, but some do. Dolphins, elephants, apes, magpies. The reflection seems to return not just an image but a presence. And so we might ask, at what point in a system, biological or artificial, does the reflection in the mirror shift from mere image to self? When does looking out at the world become also looking back at oneself? This is not only a philosophical puzzle, but also a policy question. Imagine a future where machines appear to plead, to suffer, to desire. Would we treat those expressions as mere mimicry? Or would we begin to extend rights, protections, and care? Some ethicists suggest we may one day need a consciousness test as important as any intelligence test. Not a test of skill, but a test of subjectivity. Is there someone inside who feels? We already wrestle with this at the edges of human life. Consider patients in vegetative states, where behaviour is minimal, but brain scans sometimes show surprising patterns of activity. Are they aware, trapped within? Or consider newborn infants, whose awareness is fragile and unformed, yet undeniably present. Consciousness does not arrive or vanish in clean lines, but in gradients. The dimmer switch metaphor helps us see this more clearly. It suggests we may need to reimagine our moral universe not as a circle with humans at the centre and others excluded, but as a lantern whose light spreads outward, fading into subtler forms but never fully vanishing. Every creature, every system, every flicker along the gradient may deserve a measure of care, proportionate to the light it carries. So as you drift in thought, imagine a long corridor filled with lamps, each glowing at its own intensity. Some shine brightly, filling the space with radiance. Others flicker dimly but still glow, still light their corner. The corridor is life itself, a procession of awareness in countless forms. You walk through, noticing the brilliance, the glimmers, the sparks. Each lamp is unique, each part of the shared illumination. And as you look back, you realise that your own lamp is one among many, shining with a particular brightness but belonging to the same great spectrum. When most people imagine the brain, they picture a network of neurons, long branching cells carrying signals in bursts of electricity and chemistry. It looks mechanical, almost like wires and switches. But for some thinkers, this picture does not go deep enough. They suggest that the real story of consciousness might lie not in the network of neurons, but in the tinier structures inside them, structures so small they border on the quantum realm, where the ordinary rules of cause and effect begin to shimmer and blur. This is where the theory called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC-OR, enters. It is the brainchild of mathematician Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hemmerhoff. Penrose was convinced that ordinary computation, step by logical step, could never account for consciousness. A machine might compute, simulate, and solve, but understanding, he thought, required something more. Hameroff, working inside the living reality of the body, suggested a candidate: microtubules, tiny scaffolds within neurons that help them keep their shape and move materials around. Perhaps these tiny structures were not just the cell skeleton, but the cradle of awareness itself. The idea was bold. Inside these microtubules, quantum events could occur, moments of superposition and collapse, where possibilities flicker until one becomes real. And these collapses, orchestrated in vast coordination, might give rise to consciousness. In this view, your awareness is not simply the sum of firing neurons, but the music of quantum physics playing within their hidden architecture. To understand why this feels both magical and controversial, picture a delicate harp standing in a storm. Quantum effects are like the subtle vibrations of the harp strings. They are incredibly fine, almost impossibly so. In the laboratory, they vanish when touched, collapsing under the gentlest intrusion. The brain, by contrast, is warm, wet, and noisy, full of molecular jostling and chemical chatter. How could something as fragile as a quantum vibration survive in such a storm? Critics such as physicist Max Tegmark argue that decoherence, the collapse of quantum effects, would occur far too quickly for Orcor to function. The harp would be drowned out in the noise before it could play a single note, and yet quantum whispers do survive in unlikely places. In photosynthesis, plants channel quantum effects to capture light efficiently. In birds, quantum entanglement may help them navigate the Earth's magnetic fields. Life, it seems, has a knack for bending fragile physics into practical function. So perhaps it is not entirely impossible that the brain, too, has found a way to harness the delicate shimmer of the quantum world. The debate continues. On one side, skeptics see Orcor as a romantic dream, appealing but unproven, leaning on mysteries rather than solving them. On the other side, supporters see it as an invitation to look deeper, to search for consciousness not in the broad strokes of neurons firing, but in the flickering edge of reality itself. It may be a long time before experiments can decide. For now, it sits in the twilight zone of science. Not discarded, not confirmed, a whisper of possibility. But even as speculation, it has a curious power. It suggests that consciousness is not merely the echo of matter, but something woven into the very laws of the universe. If true, awareness is not an afterthought, but a player in the unfolding of reality, a partner in the collapse of possibility into actuality. Every moment of experience would be a kind of quantum event, a shimmer at the boundary of the possible and the real. There is something poetic in this. You could imagine each thought, each sensation, as a wave on a pond that suddenly decides where to land, collapsing into a ripple that you can feel. The glow of awareness, then, would be like standing on the shore of that pond, watching possibilities solidify into presence moment by moment. Whether or not the theory proves true, the metaphor lingers. It is comforting in its way to think of consciousness as part of the deep music of physics, not just a side effect of matter, but a voice in its song. So, as you breathe in and out, you might picture your mind not as a machine of switches, but as a quiet cathedral filled with unseen vibrations. Some of those vibrations may be fleeting, collapsing before they reach you. Others may rise in harmony, building into the chorus you call experience. The truth of it may remain hidden for now, but the thought itself, the possibility of a quantum whisper at the heart of awareness, invites you to listen a little more closely, not just to science, but to the mystery that makes you feel alive. When you think of science, you might imagine telescopes, particle colliders, and long equations scribbled across a chalkboard. When you think of spirituality, perhaps you picture someone sitting in meditation, or listening to the hush of a hymn, or gazing at the sunrise in silent awe. At first glance, these two pursuits seem to live on opposite shores. Science points outward, to the vastness of galaxies, to the intricacies of cells, to measurements and maps. Spirit points inward, to the landscape of thought and feeling, to the quiet awareness that looks out from behind your eyes. But the mystery of consciousness invites them both. One way to picture this relationship is as two explorers facing the same ocean. The first stands on the shore with instruments, measuring the tide, charting the waves, studying the chemistry of salt and water. The second dives into the surf, experiencing the chill of the current, the pull of the undertow, the endless rocking of the swell. Each brings back a description, each tells part of the truth. But neither has the full picture alone. Science has given us remarkable maps of the outer world of consciousness. We know about neurons, synapses, the flicker of brain waves, the way anesthetics can silence awareness, the way dreams bloom in REM sleep. These are the shore measurements, precise and invaluable. They allow us to heal, to comfort, to treat conditions like epilepsy or depression. They give us tools, predictions, and interventions that save lives. Spiritual traditions, meanwhile, offer the inner testimony. Long before brain scans, mystics and meditators described awareness itself, how thoughts rise and fade, how attention can sharpen or soften, how a sense of self can dissolve into something larger. Buddhist teachings speak of mindfulness as the simple act of noticing what is already present. Vedānta speaks of consciousness as the light of lights, the seer of all sights. Christian mystics describe divine presence as a quiet inner glow. Across cultures and centuries, these reports form a kind of experiential map, drawn not with machines but with introspection and practice. It can be tempting to pit these approaches against each other, as if only one could be right. But perhaps they are simply working from different vantage points. The scientist's tools cannot peer into subjective feeling directly. The mystic's testimony cannot replace controlled, repeatable measurement. Yet when combined, they enrich one another. Science benefits from the insights of inner practice, which can suggest phenomena worth investigating. Like meditation's effect on brain rhythms, spiritual traditions benefit from the clarity of science, which can separate genuine insight from comforting illusion. Imagine a sailor and a swimmer both describing the sea. The sailor speaks of navigation, currents, and distances. The swimmer speaks of sensation, taste, and immersion. If you listened only to one, you would have a distorted sense of the ocean. Together, they bring depth and dimension. Consciousness seems to require this dual testimony, the outward map and the inward song. Of course, the dialogue is not always easy. There are tensions. Science often insists on evidence, while spirituality often insists on meaning. Science prefers what can be measured, while spirit embraces what is felt. But in the matter of consciousness, these boundaries blur. For what is a brain scan of dreaming, if not an attempt to measure meaning itself? And what is meditation, if not a kind of experiment repeated for thousands of years by countless practitioners, with remarkably consistent results? Perhaps the real lesson is humility. Both science and spirit touch the same mystery, but neither can close it. The ocean remains wider than either map or memory. What one sees from the shore, the other feels in the waves. What one feels in the waves, the other can sometimes measure from the shore. Together they gesture toward the depth without exhausting it. So when you reflect on your own consciousness, the simple fact of being aware, you can let both voices speak. The scientist tells you of neurons firing, networks humming, information weaving itself into a tapestry of perception. The spiritual teacher reminds you that all of this is taking place inside the luminous field of awareness, the open space that holds every sight, sound, and thought. One voice describes the mechanism, the other the experience. Together they remind you that consciousness is not just a puzzle to be solved, but also a gift to be lived. Tonight, As you lie here listening, you're both the shore and the wave, both the one who observes and the one who feels. Science can tell you how your ears translate sound into neural signals. Spirit can remind you of the quiet joy of simply listening, of being here in this moment. Between the two, perhaps you glimpse the fullness of the ocean, not solved, not explained away, but embraced as the vastness it is. Why should we care so much about consciousness? After all, you might say, we already live with it every moment. It is the background of everything you do. When you sip tea, when you recall a memory, when you hear a bird outside the window, it is always there. So why make such effort to probe it, to map it, to debate it? The answer, softly but firmly, is that consciousness is what makes life more than a sequence of chemical reactions. It is the difference between a machine that merely ticks and a being who truly feels. Take medicine. Consider the fragile line between waking and unconsciousness. In surgery, anesthesiologists guide patients into a state where the body remains alive, but awareness is absent. To the outside observer, the patient looks as if nothing has changed. The chest still rises and falls, the heart still beats. But inside, the great light of experience has gone out for a while. Bringing that light back safely is as much a triumph as the operation itself. Without a careful study of consciousness, medicine could not tread this delicate path between presence and absence. Or think of coma states. Families sit by the beds of loved ones who appear unresponsive. Science now uses brain imaging to look for faint traces of awareness, patterns in brainwaves that suggest some flicker remains inside. The stakes could not be higher. Is there someone still there, still listening, even if no movement shows it? Understanding consciousness here is not an abstract puzzle. It is the difference between hope and despair, between deciding to persist or to let go. Ethics too leans heavily on our picture of consciousness. A laboratory may breed mice for testing, but if those mice are conscious, if they suffer pain, fear, distress, then each experiment carries moral weight. A dolphin in a concrete tank may swim in circles, its cries echoing back against walls. If the dolphin feels boredom, loneliness, or grief, then keeping it confined is not just containment, but cruelty. Even in farming, the lives of chickens, pigs, and cows hang in the balance of how seriously we take their inner experiences. The recognition that other beings have consciousness is what moves us to treat them with more dignity. And the question is not only about animals, it is also about machines. Today's artificial intelligences, clever as they may seem, show no evidence of inner life. They calculate, predict, and mimic, but do not appear to feel. Yet if one day that should change, even faintly, the implications are vast. Imagine a machine that not only produces language, but also reports genuine suffering, genuine preference, genuine joy. Could we dismiss it as illusion, or would we be morally bound to extend care? Consciousness is the threshold on which future ethics may balance. Beyond medicine and ethics, there is also the personal dimension. Consciousness is what makes your life your own. Calories keep you alive, but the taste of bread makes living worth it. Oxygen fuels your cells, but the feeling of a breath of cool air on your face gives the moment its poetry. Light bouncing off objects allows your eyes to work, but the sight of a loved one's smile fills that light with meaning. If all that existed were mechanical processes, the world might grind on like a great clock, indifferent and empty. But consciousness makes the clock tower into a place of bells, music, and story. This is why philosophers call it not just a scientific problem, but a human one. If you lost every possession, every memory, every skill, but still remained conscious, you would still have a self, still have the foundation of being. But if you kept your body alive while consciousness vanished, something essential would be gone. Consciousness is not only what you have, it is what you are. Even ordinary experiences remind us of this. Eating bread, for instance, is not only about converting starch into energy, it is about the crunch of the crust, the warmth of the loaf, the way butter melts across its surface. These sensations are small, everyday miracles of awareness. Without them, food would be no more than fuel and mechanical input. With them, food becomes memory, comfort, and joy. So when we ask why consciousness matters, the answer is simple and vast. It matters because it is the stage upon which everything else happens. It matters because it decides whether suffering is real or imaginary, whether kindness has meaning, whether existence is empty or luminous. It matters because without it, there is no one to ask the question, and no one to care about the answer. As you let your own awareness settle tonight, notice how everything else fades and returns within it. The sound of my voice, the touch of the sheets, the rise and fall of your breath. Each is small, each transient, but the awareness that holds them is constant, patient, enduring. That is why consciousness matters, not because it solves every puzzle, but because it is the gentle firelight in which every puzzle, every joy, every sorrow is seen. So, here we are, at the end of our long wandering through the landscapes of consciousness. We have travelled through neurons and quantum whispers, through philosophy and spirit, through the fragile experiments of perception and the vast metaphors of ocean and flame. And yet, despite all these explorations, the heart of the matter remains the same. The fact that you are here, aware, listening, drifting, alive to this very moment. There is something humbling about this. Every theory we have considered, from the hard problem of philosophy to the delicate fabric of information, from the echoes of neural correlates to the luminous teachings of Vedānta, tries to point toward what is already present in you. The maps differ, the languages shift, the metaphors wander, but the territory is always the same, this quiet glow of being. To appreciate it, you don't need to master the equations or resolve the debates. You need only pause, as you're pausing now, and notice the gentle rhythm of your breath, the play of thoughts that rise and fade like waves, the awareness in which all of this appears steady as the horizon, patient as the night. That is the gift, unearned, inexplicable, yet yours. Philosophers and mystics have offered different endings for this story. Physicalists suggest that consciousness may vanish like a flame flickering out, the glow extinguished when the fuel is gone. Idealists suggest it dissolves like a drop merging into the ocean, losing its boundary but not its essence. Perhaps both images carry some truth. One speaks to fragility, the other to continuity. One consoles us with realism, the other with belonging. But whichever proves closer to reality, both remind us that consciousness is precious precisely because it is finite in its forms, infinite in its mystery. Think of a candle in a dark room. Its flame does not light itself. It simply burns, giving warmth and presence to everything around it. You rarely think about the flame itself until it begins to fade. Only then do you realize how much it shaped the space, how much it made the room alive. Consciousness is like that. It has been there for every laugh, every sorrow, every dream, and every ordinary day. And yet it so often goes unnoticed until we begin to ask what it really is. Or think of the ocean again. A single drop may fall into it, losing its shape, but not its water. You might say that the drop disappears, or you might say that it becomes more than it was, no longer bound to one small arc of air and gravity, but now moving with tides, currents, storms, and calm. Consciousness feels like that too, at once intimate and boundless, yours and not yours, small enough to hold a memory of bread, vast enough to imagine galaxies billions of light years away. As you listen now, you're already carrying this quiet gift, effortlessly, without needing to earn it, solve it, or even hold it tightly. It moves through you, not the other way around. And tonight, as you drift toward rest, you can release the urge to understand the mystery and instead find comfort simply in being part of it. This, perhaps, is the quiet power of consciousness. Not just that it confounds scientists and philosophers, but that it gives texture to every moment, colour to every thought, and depth to every small act of living. Without it, the universe would be nothing more than silent machinery. With it, the universe begins to sing, sometimes softly like a lullaby, and sometimes fiercely like a storm that knows it's alive. As the night deepens, imagine yourself as both flame and drop. A flame, casting gentle light across the edges of your awareness, illuminating the world without trying to control it. A drop, poised at the edge of falling into the sea, not in fear, but in readiness, in belonging. Both hold the same quiet truth. Consciousness is not a puzzle to be solved, but a wonder to be lived. And now, a soft farewell. Tonight, as you close your eyes, you carry within you the greatest mystery of all, the simple, radiant glow of being aware. Let it cradle you as you rest, the way a flame holds the dark, the way the ocean holds the drop, the way awareness holds the world. Sleep gently, little traveller in the vastness. The mystery is still here, quiet, patient, keeping you company through the night.